So big welcome to all, and many thanks for joining us. We're expecting quite a large crowd, and when we checked, there were people from over 30 countries registered, so it should be quite a rich conversation in the geographies that it brings together. My name is Adriana Allen. I'm a professor at the Development Planning Unit and also the president of Habitat International Coalition. And these two organizations, DPU and HIC, have come together, together also with a program from DPU called Knowledge in Action for Urban Equality to co-host and co-organize this event. So many thanks to all. So before we start, I would like to just to say a few words on why are we having this conversation. In a very short period, the COVID-19 crisis has forced us to devise new ways to keep in close contact while working remotely. And we have done so at an unprecedented pace and scale. However, our focus today is not on digital technologies, but rather on the multiple ways in which we are increasingly experimenting with, and I could say also instigating, collective learning opportunities. These experiences are what we term here remote pedagogies. While acknowledging that they do not replace face-to-face learning, of course, and also that many different forms of distance learning precede the COVID-19 crisis, we seem to be facing something new, something different, something that poses both opportunities and challenges for social learning. Among the challenges, it is undeniable that greater reliance on digital contact can unwillingly reinforce the digital divide, the multiple asymmetries between those who can and cannot fully participate in what Manuel Castells described many years ago as a network society in which we increasingly live. We know that these asymmetries can be deepened by pre-existing inequalities in terms of gender, age, class, and so on. But there are also multiple emerging opportunities that somehow seem to be activating and spreading more than ever practices of critical pedagogy. This invites us to reflect on questions of where, who, why, what, and why, as we critically examine these emerging learning practices. Such opportunities include, for instance, the social proximity that emerges through these learning practices. Even at a very superficial level, think, for instance, about the qualities brought to collective conversations like this, when these take place not from the curated spaces of formal classrooms, but from the intimacy of our homes, and intercepted by our children walking in and out of a common space. A second characteristic of these remote encounters is that in many instances, they blur the traditional boundaries between learners and educators. In other words, we all become pedagogues. Our experiences and views are somehow leveled up in a playing field which disrupts, or at least interrupts momentarily, hierarchical modes of learning. A third characteristic of many of the experiences emerging over the last couple of months is perhaps that typically they do not approach learning through predetermined curricula, but rather through open agendas. Thus, we find ourselves relating to experiences and perspectives that we might be less familiar with, coming together in collective conversations across multiple and contrasting physical, social, cultural, and political geographies. Last but not least, it is worth reflecting on why we embark in these experiences and what changes do they produce, or at least we aim that they produce. In this sense, one could claim that we witness a wave of what we could call generative pedagogies, which open multiple avenues for transformative change. As we will see through the presentations, such avenues might have crucial value, for instance, in recognizing everyday practices often stigmatized. Think, for example, of the way in which speakers are increasingly being reframed as key social workers, or women becoming increasingly recognized in their multiple caring roles, and we could think about many more examples. Other avenues are clearly forging and amplifying collective practices of solidarity and care, or supporting local and regional governments to take their role well beyond street cleaning and parks maintenance. Furthermore, some practices are opening unprecedented spaces for political incidents and calling upon structural changes, such as prioritizing the social function of housing, land, water, and so on. We have today an amazing array of speakers who very kindly agreed to share their experiences and showing a critical exploration of what these experiences mean, how they work, and for whom. But before we do so, we would like to hear your views on the challenges and opportunities that remote pedagogies pose for social learning. So I'm going to pass the floor to my colleague, Julia Wesely, who is a research fellow at the DPU's program, Knowledge in Action for Urban Equality, and she will take us through a quick consultation with all participants in the audience. Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adriana, and welcome everyone. So what we want to do now, I would ask you to, or invite you to go to the website www.menti.com and use the code, if you're asked, that is 83862. And what we'd like to invite you is to reflect based on your experience over the past weeks and past months in comparison to your work before the pandemic. To ask yourself the first question, what are your two key concerns about using remote technologies for social learning? So I invite you now to just type your answers and we will see them as they come in. So just go to the website, menti.com, and use the code 83862. And while you're thinking maybe about your answers, and while we're waiting for more replies to come up, I just want to share that Mentiverse is one, I think, quite good example of how technologies have been just scaled up during this crisis and how they've been used in different ways to what was initially anticipated. So Menti was founded in 2014, actually to increase productivity in meetings, while now it is used very much to really be able to have a window to read rooms in scenarios like webinars, like now. So it has been taken to scale also in an educational context and had I think 20 million users in 2018. And now it has over 85 million during May. So what we're seeing, I think what comes out as key concerns, first, there are many, but what seems to come up is lack of engagement, isolation, also more technical issues like internet connections. So on the one hand, questions of how do we really create proximity without getting saturated by our social interactions? How do we deal with issues such as the digital divide, which make conversations like this, can shift the hierarchies or the power relations in conversations compared to how they are offline. Miscommunication is also coming up. Issues of privacy, obviously, fatigue, the attention span that we're having in meetings such as that. Just trying to read more. Questions of infrastructure, the human touch that might be missing in conversations like that, and the connection, that we're just all getting a little tired or a lot tired of screen time. And also interesting points of, how much are we just being talked at and how much do we actually listen to in the different scenarios. So thank you very much for engaging so vividly with that. I'm quite happy to see that in that way. So let's just go on to the next question, which is, what are then two key possibilities to enable social learning, to enable advocacy and collective action? And again, reflecting on your experience over the past weeks compared to how it was before. Where do you really see potential emerging at this moment? So I'm just going to give it a couple of more seconds to see what answers seem to be emerging. So what is interesting is that issues of partnerships are coming up, which I'm sure that a lot of our speakers will touch upon. The flexibility and being able to work asynchronous and at the same time, to enable global interactions like the one we're having now. As Adriana mentioned, we have more than 30 countries being represented in this conversation or in this webinar today. also what is coming up is, issues around collectivizing learning, collective action, so that really we're not everyone in our individual bubbles, but apparently there is something generative, similar to what Adriana introduced before. The breaking of hierarchies is also something very interesting, especially in scenarios like webinars where algorithms position us basically where we are on the screen, and where exercises like Menti give one vote to every person. So that's quite interesting as well. So thank you. Thank you very much. Issues of solidarity, I think, is also something, inclusivity, empathy, that I'm sure that many of our speakers will touch upon. So thank you for that. Let me just share the screen again.
Thank you so much, Julia. So we thought to organize the time we have in 2 blocks, or slightly 2 blocks. And in the first block, we have, if you go to the next one, yeah. What we did was to call upon a number of friends and colleagues who clearly work on processes of social learning and grassroots social learning from in a very networked way. And these are organizations such as the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights, SHAC and Slum Dwellers International, and Habitat International Coalition. Again, for people in these networks and the speakers that are today with us, the use of this sort of digital platforms and so on is not new, or experimentation with taking to the limits the possibility of bringing proximity to people who might be far from each other. So without further ado, I'm going just to invite the first 2 speakers. We're going to have 5 minutes from each presentation, and then again, please remember to post any, not only questions, but also comments you might have for the speakers, or for all, just to tease the discussion a bit further on the questions and answers. So I want to give the floor to Brenda Perez Castro. Brenda is the regional coordinator of the ACHR, the Asian Coalition for Housing Rights. And she's also joined in this presentation by my dear colleague, Barbara Lipietz, who is an associate professor at the Bartlett Development Planning Unit. They are also both co-investigators in the NODE program. So Brenda and Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adriana, Julia, and everyone at VPU for this invitation. I think it's a great opportunity to share with other sister networks of ours. I'm going to go straight to it because we have very short time, and I just wanted to bring a little bit of context on how we think learning processes happen within ACHR, within the groups that are part of ACHR at the national levels and local levels, and also how these means of sharing knowledge and co-learning that we traditionally have used have been challenged during this pandemic. So just to introduce, for those of you who are not very familiar with ACHR, something I wanted to emphasize on is that it's a coalition, it's a network that is mostly led by community organizations, community networks in 19 countries in the Asian region. And, but it's not limited to community organizations or grassroots. What I want to show with this graphic is the importance of the different support actors that are part of our network, which have a key role in how knowledge is created, circulated, disseminated, and recreated and reinvented in our network. What is the very key principle of the ACHR's work is that no knowledge is more important than other person's knowledge. And this is a principle of work particularly when we talk about the knowledge of the communities we work with. It's a network that emphasizes on the need of not imposing, or the professionals or the activists should not take a role that is leading or that is pushing, but is actually a support role. So that this is a very important context, because this relates to the tools that we use and the means that we use to co-create knowledge. Now, if we want to go, if you can go to the next slide, please. I'm just going to give you a brief idea of what type of knowledge is usually circulating or what type of knowledge is usually created within the ACHR network. But that, of course, has changed during this pandemic. It's not on the slide, but just as a general description of the knowledge that is created within our network, we're a network that works for housing rights, that works in supporting community organizations in accessing land and housing. But it's important to say that it's not just as an end in itself. Accessing housing and land is not an end in itself for ACHR, but it's a means to strengthen community organization. And our goal is probably, our broader goal is around development, development that is community-based. So it's very important for us to see in the context of this pandemic that those tools and those different ways of co-learning that we have developed for nearly 30 years, those tools such as mapping, such as savings network, such as community exchanges, all those tools have been so crucial in this moment of the pandemic and have been recreated in a way that has allowed us to create responses, community-based responses to subjects or to topics that are not our usual subjects. As you may imagine, a lot of the response, the virus response has to do with solving the main social impacts that the lockdown measures have had into communities. And those have to do with accessing food. Food security is a big issue. So a lot of the knowledge that is circulating among our network right now is how to be useful to attend that needs. So we're reinventing in many ways the knowledge that we have and the mechanisms that we used to respond to this crisis. We have also identified that there is a very key role among the support groups and also the community groups in condensating the knowledge that we have as networks about the poor communities in each of the cities where we work. And that is knowledge that, for example, local governments usually don't have. So we have found it very powerful that we are able to create and condensate and share that knowledge with other stakeholders. But also we have realized, and our groups on the ground have realized, that because we have these channels of communication that are so ingrained within the poor communities, we have been able to share messages that are coming from the governments and trying to reach the communities. So this is just to give you a brief idea of how the type of knowledge that usually circulates in our networks is shifting now during the COVID crisis, and as part of the very strong response and the very active and diverse response that the ACHR groups have provided. Next, please. The next slide is about how do we learn? How do we usually learn? And I'm glad to see that that this is the point of the discussion in this meeting. We always emphasize that the way we learn is by doing, and that is been proven in the 30 years that all the community groups in our network have been working in Asia. Many of them have created knowledge out of practice, and that's a very driving characteristic of our groups. So we learn by doing, we learn by exchanging, and I think it's important to show that this tool that has been used by HIC, by SDI, by ACHR, this happened at the same, and there was a historic moment in which there was an interest of exchanging between regions and within countries. And there is this shared historic background on how we identify that there is a poor people's pedagogy among all of our networks, and that we have learned from each other's and from organized groups of poor communities across the world. So this is a message that we still carry, and that we have developed in different ways. How we turn that into partnerships, and those how we turn those exchanges and that knowledge that is created collectively, how we turn that into a tool that allows us to create partnerships with local governments, for example. So that is, this is how we start creating knowledge also by co-creating with partners who are outside of our networks. And of course, there is a more formal way of sharing knowledge that we have been strengthening in the last few years that have to do with documenting and researching. Those are more formal ways of sharing information and sharing knowledge. But partly what we are looking at facing this crisis is that the informal ways of learning and sharing knowledge and the formal ways need to be recreated. You can pass to the next slide. And I think Barbara is going to start with the next slide.
Okay, so I'll jump straight into the other one. So yes, the issue that Brenda, I'm going to pick up from where Brenda left us, is how do we build on these already existing ways of communicating and co-learning? And I think the thing that has been really impressive, at least for those who are observing and working with the ACHI, is the rapidity of adaptation in the context of COVID. And what's the rapidity of adaptation, and of course the way in which that has built on already existing mechanism, and therefore the way it's localized in different contexts, in different parts of the network. So here are a number of pointers. For instance, so what's interesting is that there's a number of already existing processes that have digitalized, that have extended and digitalized. These are community dialogues, which are now happening through the help of Zoom, for instance, but also social networks and the use of mobile apps that were already existing that have found a new wave and have amplified. Same, old technologies like staying connected through calls and mobile apps have continued, in the same way that face-to-face has continued to some degree also, but have extended to some degree sometimes through blending processes. But another interesting point is the way in which the COVID crisis has also facilitated the catalyzing of a deepening of engagement with these remote technologies that was already existing, but now is taking a new configuration or going into different directions. Some of these, for instance, are the use of short videos and podcasts. So videos were already used by some of the networks in acting as inspiration and as co-learning through videos. Now there is, with developing through the No program, but also with the CAN network and then ACHR, an attempt to sort of develop a whole series of community-led videos in order to capture experiences and responses. But also the idea of using podcasts as more reflexive spaces, where a number of actors that circulate around ACHR, as Brenda showed in the first slide, can come together and reflect on the learnings from COVID and generally around mobilization and community-led responses to the kinds of crises as COVID. And lastly, the use of totally new technologies, for instance, Maptionnaire, which we introduced in the context of a field trip between Arcom Jogja and the DPU's Urban Development Planning course, which is basically a way of doing what Arcom and other people in the ACHR network have been doing for a long time, which is participatory mapping, but doing that remotely. And what's really interesting is to see the avenues that it's opening up. And we're going to talk about this in the last slide, Julia, if that's possible. So some reflections on remote co-learning. So this was in discussion with Brenda, of course, all of this. We discussed the kind of unexpected gains from this move, this rapid and rather unexpected move to digital. Some of this was the growth and strengthening of networks. For instance, I'm thinking of the Arcom Jogja in Indonesia, who tended to work with specific river-based communities, and through the COVID and Maptionnaire have now extended to a variety of extra networks. And so through these new technologies are actually expanding the kinds of group that they engage with. Engagement of younger generations is certainly another one, often because simply like the people who are having to use the mobile apps are having to call on their children to help them, etc. Or there's conversations with younger people. So there's an potential interesting shift happening there because of the attraction of new technologies. The other important issue that we are starting to witness is the impact of these new channels of communications. What we're seeing is that because data is now being shared digitally, for instance, data that was gathered through Maptionnaire in Indonesia has now been sort of analyzed, put into graphics, have in fact fantastic graphics developed from them, and are now having a digital platform, which wasn't necessarily the case with community-led community collected data before. So there's new audiences that are being targeted or can be attracted to this kind of information. But also, therefore, because of the different way in which that information is being shared, renewed recognition and visibility of this community-led data. So there's something very interesting there that we are seeing emerging, and that needs to be thought about more carefully. However, there are nonetheless a number of issues also that are raised. One is that what we call the necessary fun of messiness, and messiness of a lot of the participatory processes involved in this kind of co-learning through doing, through exchange, is lost in the process, or has for the moment been lost through Zoom meetings, etc. And we're not saying that it's lost forever for sure, but there has to be quite a lot of reflection as how that can be created. If we understand that learning is not sort of linear, that a lot of learning takes place outside of what was expected, how do we create these outside spaces where learning can happen? The other point we wanted to raise, two other points, and we'll close with that. I know, sorry about that, Adriana. Maybe the digital divide, we'll talk very quickly about it because others will talk about it. Is there a risk here? Of course, that not everybody has access to these digital technologies. On the other hand, we've also heard some positive sides. For instance, some in the Kalijawi who were working with the Maptionnaire was saying, actually more people now have a capacity to give their input through this individual digital platform than they might have had in collective discussions possibly. But also, I guess, a warning around, you know, not the lure of the digital, and how can we sort of be careful about the way in which you use it. Finally, a point around generational transition. I guess, our new generation is going to be brought in to this digital world and ways of mobilization and advocacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Brenda and Barbara. A great start. I am very aware that Emilia Saiz from UCL, she needs to leave us before the end. So I'm wondering, Emilia, would it be better if everyone is okay with that, if we change the order and you come next? We are going to just mix a bit the proposed order. If that's okay. Are you okay with that?
Yes, happy to do that, and thank you very much for taking that into consideration.
So then after that, perhaps we continue with Catalina, and we have a final block again with James and Sibu and Maria, Silvia. Okay, so please, Emilia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adriana, and thank you, Brenda and Barbara, for those very, very interesting presentations. Now, the first thing that I need to clarify is that I am not into didactics, and I am not a specialist in learning, but learning is changing, and training are very much part of the DNA of the movement that I have been working for the last 20-some years. That is the international municipal movement. We have a very strong network of cities and their associations, which have as a very important aim to learn from each other, to exchange practices. Now, exchanging practices, is that really learning? This is a question that we've been asking ourselves. And does a mayor learn from someone else than a mayor? That is also a very important question that we have been asking ourselves over time. Our network is very big and very diverse, and we have learned to see that providing an important safe port, a safe harbor to exchange experiences in a language that we share and around issues that are interesting to us, do provide a very good environment for actual learning and for actual co-creation. From the experience that we are currently having now, And this, let me just put this other concept on the map. And we have been doing this over the past 100 years, more or less, based on peer-to-peer learning. The peer-to-peer learning some decades ago was based on face-to-face academies. We founded important academies for municipalities, you know, and the people from India came to The Hague to an academy, and they went through courses, and people from Africa, Uganda, went to Norway and went through courses there. But with time, we have kept some of those academies, municipal academies, but we have also evolved into what we like to call action learning. And that action learning and peer-to-peer learning is what inspired our activities during COVID, which gave a name of life learning experiences. Because what we were putting to the service of our membership was not processed information. And that non-processed information, this life experiencing, put together, exchange with each other, we believe can be a very important instrument to collective learning and can really lead to the type of transformative diplomacy that we like to think our movement promotes. Now, some of the challenges that we are facing with that is that we feel that it is our experience that you need to have a rather cohesive network already with a lot of experience, like the one that you have described, Brendan and Barbara, to make this actually work. Because otherwise you only have people that are being talked to, like the Mentimeter showed, but they are not receiving a lot of that feedback. However, if you have a network already, if you have an environment where people know each other and they have commitment and trust because they have gone through things before, they have tried to advocate for change before, then something happens. The type of collective learning that we are putting in place is collective learning that has an aim towards transformation. And that's what differentiates us from a typical process of learning, of academic learning, for instance, where that transformation is more personal. And how to do this with the new environment. Now, I have to say that I feel our tools are very precarious. I mean, it's wonderful how fast we have been able to implement them, but they are very precarious because, I mean, sometimes now my team is really a pro in this Zoom environment, but I want them to have a workshop with Zoom executives and tell them everything I would like to change. You know, we would like to change so many things about this Zoom platform. Because I think that these platforms have actually not been conceived for the dimensions that we are starting to use them at right now. And for those of us that are less used to work on it. Our experience has been, I mean, our experience has been wonderful. We've mobilized over 3,000 participants. We had over 100 cases exposed, literally from every part of the world. I held our executive bureau last week with you know, over 100 mayors were there. We had several principals of the UN. We had over 300 participants. They were all, you know, very, very happy about it. But still a lot of people felt that they were just participating in a webinar, not in a true learning experience. And so this is why I found your invitation very interesting and the conversation that you are having extremely important. Because I think with networks like the ones that we have, like SDI and many others that you have represented, I think there is a true opportunity to complement what we do. I think that HIC members can actually find themselves very comfortable in this new environment because they trust what we are sharing. But I don't think that these tools are enough to create that trust. The trust needs to be there. Or a lot would need to change. I mean, only if the majority of the people that are participating have that trust already, then we can combat that isolation. And the last thought that I wanted to leave with you, this experience for us, which is really based on our philosophy of seek, sense, and share from the realities of our cities, that is based on the philosophy of trying to transform, so trying to influence advocacy through learning, peer-to-peer learning, city-to-city learning. All of these things, I feel in this new environment, need to show a progress. I don't think that is enough anymore to offer a module, a learning module, or a training of trainers that if you don't show, okay, how is this going to be transformed into joint advocacy or co-creation for policy making. That's where we are. And again, we are not academics. You've invited an organization of local and regional governments to this forum. So some of the things that I might be sharing with you could sound very, very simplistic from your perspective, but that's where we are. We are trying to see, okay, we are offering these spaces. What is going to link those experiences and those spaces to policy transformation? And how can that become collective advocacy? So what we have done is a small step now. We have transformed the live learning experiences, obviously in briefings with policy recommendations and press releases, etc. But most importantly, they have been the inspiration of a decalogue, a political decalogue for the COVID aftermath. And that is what has created the true ownership. I mean, I think the live learning experiences have fostered pride of the network and the acknowledgement that, hey, we are there, we are responsive, we are meaningful. But I think that the 10 recommendations, the decalogue, so the next step is what has created the ownership of this is why we are together. So I really look forward to seeing how we can experiment with these technologies. But I think you're absolutely right. It's not about the technologies. I would welcome the possibility, however, to adapt the technologies to everything that we know as networks. But I think we need to do the hard work of pioneering the link between the actual learning opportunity and the transformative experience collectively. So I leave it there. I don't know if this is what you were looking for, but this is how we are experiencing it. And I don't want to bore you with our next steps about MOOCs and new ways of exploring new ways to reach more of our network. People of the learning team of UCLG are also attending the seminar, and they are much more versed in that than I am myself. But these are just the provoking thoughts that we are facing when we look at learning. We like to think we are a learning network, and hopefully we can go further with you. Thank you very much, Adriana, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Emilia. And I just wonder, I mean, again, we have changed a bit the order, but we are going to go through everything as planned. But again, because Emilia is just about to leave us, I wonder if we could just open the floor for perhaps one question at least for Brenda, Barbara, and Emilia before Emilia leaves us, and then we will move into the second block as planned. So Julia, you have been keeping an eye on the questions or comments or observations.
Yeah, I think one question that was directed towards Brenda, but also the whole, I think the overall framing of like community-led development and pro-poor learning was in how much that was an adaptation or related to Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, and if you're drawing from that. And then there were other questions that were more related to, how much are we just consuming, and whose role is it to actually filter, digest, and make knowledge actually available and useful for communities. So would you see an intermediary in that way, and who has this kind of role of intermediaries? I'm just seeing that there's lots more questions coming in right now.
Shall we take
so maybe we can take those two, and yeah,
give a chance to each to answer, and then we go into.
We have another session after of question and answers.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, definitely. There is an influence of Freire's pedagogy in what's on the basis of what ACHR has developed as the co-learning experience and the pedagogy of the poor communities. Of course, this didn't happen as an educational process, as a formal process in which someone came and gave us a training. No, first of all, ACHR has existed for 30 years. So when Freire's ideas were spreading across the world, ACHR and all the members that are part of our network were already aware of his ideas. And also people were coming from Latin America. And I'd like to trace all these connections between the different regions on how we have built shared ideas on how community-led development should happen, and what is the key role that communities have in defining and shaping what that development is, and precisely based on the exchange between those poor communities. And that one of those threads that I have traced between Freire and also the theology of liberation coming to Asia was through Father Jorge Anzorena, an Argentinian father, who came to Asia and started traveling from country to country, just identifying what the poor were doing and what were the key activities that they were doing and how they were solving their poverty issues. He started writing it and sharing it among the groups that he had visited. And this is partly how the co-learning within the ACHR network started, just by telling stories on how poor communities were solving poverty issues. So there is an influence, there is an indirect, but I also think there is a very direct influence of the pedagogy of the oppressed in how ACHR works and understands sharing knowledge and creating development from the grassroots. The other question, I don't know if it was addressed to me. Can you repeat, Julia, the second question?
Maybe also to give the other panelists the space to respond, but the other question was in relation to the intermediaries and how to digest knowledge and really make it actionable for communities. So I think, Emilia, that was more directed to you.
Yes, indeed. Well, the first thing I wanted to say to Brenda that I very much identify with what she's saying, because that process of the poor people's pedagogies can easily be also applied or could be used to describe what we did in our network. It was city to city. It was giving the opportunity to these local officials to come together, and that's how they learned. And that's how city-to-city cooperation was developed, and city-to-city learning and peer learning. On the intermediaries, this is where this important role of networks comes in. I think that it is up to networks of communities by communities, of local governments by local governments to co-create this learning and to transform the exchange of experiences in collective learning. And actually, nobody else can do it in the same way, because they would always be pushing for a certain agenda, which is something that I am experiencing a lot with in our relationships with consultancy firms that are offering very good courses for elected officials or academia. I think we need to strike the right balance between the depth of what academia can offer and the collective learning that we are trying to push through through the network. So for me, the role that the networks need to play, the civil society organizations, the associations of local and regional governments and others, is very critical, because it's the only space where true co-creation and transformative policy making can be fostered.
Thank you so much, Brenda, and I'm sure that Barbara also has things to say. Sorry, but remember, we will have, especially if everybody is happy to stay a bit longer, more time to continue this conversation. So, Julia, if we can move to the second block of speakers with all the changes we have made.
Yes, so we thought that we would continue with the presentation by Maria Silvia Emanueli from HIC Latin America. She's the regional coordinator. Silvia?
Hola, muchas gracias. Buenos días a todos y todas. Perdón, yo tengo otro webinar en 10 minutos con la Secretaría de Vivienda de México y voy a tener que ser súper precisa en tiempo, pero les agradezco muchísimo, es un gusto estar aquí. Como ya comentó Emilia, tampoco somos expertas en temas pedagógicos, pero con gusto compartimos un poco nuestras reflexiones. Somos también de una red de vivienda a nivel mundial, tenemos más de 40 años de vida y entonces, como ustedes imaginarán, hemos pasado también por muchas fases en las cuales hemos tenido que reinventar un poco nuestra forma de estar juntos y juntas y de construir conocimiento. Seguramente la red nace de un encuentro entre el norte y el sur que se llevó a cabo en una conferencia de las Naciones Unidas hace 40 años, más de 40, que fue Hábitat 1. Entonces, digamos, el encuentro y la construcción de confianza política, como ya bien mencionó Emilia, es y sigue siendo el alma, digamos, de nuestra red. Aún así, es cierto que desde hace mucho tiempo ya hemos empezado a utilizar las herramientas que nos pone a disposición la tecnología para estar en comunicación más frecuente. Muy similar a lo que planteaba ya Brenda de la Coalición Asiática para el Derecho a la Vivienda, con la cual encontré grandes, digamos, una gran cercanía seguramente, es que nuestra red, bueno, yo soy la coordinadora de la Oficina para América Latina, nuestra red en América Latina tiene alrededor de 100 entre organizaciones, redes, movimientos sociales, técnicos y académicos y académicas. Aquí solo les muestro una imagen, digamos, de un seminario entre miembros que tuvimos hace poco, presencial, y bueno, para mostrarle un poco que obviamente hay una variedad de organizaciones y grupos al interior de la red y eso hace, como decía Brenda también, que el conocimiento se vaya construyendo todos juntos, todas juntas, a partir de las comunidades hasta llegar, digamos, a nuestros grupos académicos. Sí, como decíamos, todo empezó por un encuentro, por la presencialidad, por planteamientos políticos compartidos. Hemos pasado por muchas fases, cuando llegó el fax y la posibilidad de comunicarse con fax, y todavía, ¿quién lo recuerda como la revolución? ¿No? Y están todavía en nuestra red, pero obviamente han cambiado los tiempos y también hay que decir que hemos obviamente seguido construyendo mensajes colectivos y agendas políticas a la distancia porque no podemos estarnos reuniendo todas las veces con todas las organizaciones. Y aquí hay un tema que sigue siendo relevante. La coalición ha pasado por las dictaduras en América Latina, ha sobrevivido a estas dictaduras, digamos, pero seguramente a veces nuestros temas siguen siendo temas políticos delicados y el tema no son los más delicados probablemente, no trabajamos derechos civiles, pero sigue siendo el tema de la seguridad también un tema a considerarse a veces en los debates que se dan en nuestra coalición, sobre todo con algunos grupos. Bueno, más allá de reunirnos, encontrarnos, hacerlo a través de online hoy y hacer reuniones para construir mensajes, obviamente, como dice Emilia, buscamos también hacer incidencia a partir de esos encuentros virtuales que se han ido reforzando con la pandemia, y esto sí, efectivamente, no siempre es lo más sencillo, que del encuentro virtual, de la construcción colectiva, podamos saltar, digamos, a la parte de también la incidencia colectiva. Entonces, lo que estamos haciendo, lo más reciente, digamos, es, por ejemplo, construir un manifiesto político. Es algo que se ha decidido recientemente en relación con el COVID, hemos también construido lineamientos sobre asentamientos precarios, pero la incidencia luego regresa, digamos, a nivel local, y cada quien evalúa cómo poder llevar el mensaje o los mensajes a las autoridades locales con las cuales está trabajando. Entonces, sí hay que decir que ha habido más interés hoy en construir documentos colectivos. Siempre se ha hablado de esto, pero no siempre a la distancia era fácil, y hoy creo que sí lo hemos logrado. La movilización, como decíamos, la agenda política en lo local regresa a ser muy relevante incluso en estos tiempos, porque, como saben, la incidencia, digamos, a nivel internacional, que también hace nuestra oficina, hoy se ve limitada y restringida. También hemos reinventado, y ya se ha hablado de los podcasts, digamos, la posibilidad de hacer escuchar la voz de nuestra coalición, con su variedad de miembros y de caras, un poco más allá, obviamente, de lo local, a través de los podcasts. Por ejemplo, este es uno de los ejemplos últimos. Es una especie de radio comunitaria, ¿no?, transformada para las redes sociales. Y eso nos permitirá, según nuestro planteamiento, enriquecer el manifiesto político que recientemente hemos construido en materia de COVID, escuchar más voces desde todos los rincones de nuestro continente. Pero además, desde hace mucho tiempo hacemos también formación online. No la hemos estado haciendo tal cual, más allá de estos encuentros, de estos intercambios en el COVID. En el COVID digamos, en la pandemia hemos dialogado mucho, nos hemos reunido mucho, pero no hemos hecho formación tal cual, digamos. Pero lo interesante, diría, es que, en primer lugar, nuestros miembros en América Latina nos han reconocido que nuestra oficina, sobre todo, y todos los miembros, hemos construido juntos un patrimonio conceptual, metodológico y técnico fundamental para transformar las políticas del hábitat desde nuestra conformación, incluso cuando no existían estos medios de comunicación a distancia. Esto nos reconocen nuestros miembros. Y lo hemos hecho también en los últimos tiempos a través de diplomados, por ejemplo, adentro de la universidad pública. Hemos peleado, como muchos y muchas, para que nuestro conocimiento pueda estar en la universidad, nuestros movimientos sociales puedan, incluso sin haber a fuerzas terminado la educación formal, estar en la universidad, recibir un diplomado universitario, por ejemplo. Y hemos hecho el tipo de documentos que aquí, o el tipo de diplomados que aquí presento. El diálogo siempre es a la base de esto, es entre la educación popular y la pedagogía críticas, una teorización basada en la práctica. Nuestros movimientos sociales son los ponentes y las ponentes también, obviamente, de estos diplomados. Una formación para todos y todas que se basa en la gratuidad, en el enfoque de género, en el esfuerzo intergeneracional, que no siempre es fácil, pero lo buscamos, en la interactoralidad, que buscamos también en estos diplomados, y en horarios flexibles, muy relevante en la posibilidad de grabar una clase y hacer que quien pueda, cuando pueda, la escuche y haya momentos también para encontrarnos. Y luego eso, una lucha en general para estar en la universidad pública con nuestros temas que son críticos, que son de nicho, digamos, en las universidades, como puede ser la producción social del hábitat. Y finalmente, simplemente el tema de la solidaridad y la contención en lo local, que es el cuarto tema, es muy frecuente ya en América Latina que existan grupos de WhatsApp previos, obviamente, a la contingencia que permiten articular. Hoy estos grupos se han fortalecido. Algo nuevo, digamos, es que también hay reuniones por parte de los movimientos sociales a través de varios medios, pero los grupos ya existían, son grupos que hacen contención, que responden a la violencia de género, que responden a necesidades alimentarias, de salud y agua. Hoy también en el COVID se ha creado un gran grupo regional que articula temáticas de asentamientos precarios a través de un WhatsApp que es coordinado por Joan McDonald en Chile, ex ministra de Vivienda, pero que se compone de un número muy grande de caras, ¿no? de personas de todo tipo, y hoy tendrán su primera reunión en vista también de una posible incidencia común. Hay que ver cómo daremos este salto y luego, bueno, una serie de reuniones de articulación. Entonces, eso es mi presentación. Yo diría que pues hay muchos temas que me están surgiendo, digamos, después de escucharlos, pero comparto mucho también las conclusiones que ya hacían en la primera presentación. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Me disculpo, ya me están llamando en el otro webinar. Perdón, les mando muchos abrazos y si alguien tiene una pregunta muy específica le pueden pasar mi correo y con gusto la contesto.
Muchas gracias, Silvia. We're now going to continue with the presentation by James Taylor and by Sibulele Roji, who are working with No UCD TV, which is an initiative, a program by SDI, Islamic Shack Fellows International. James?
Yes, hi. Thank you for having us on this panel. It's been really interesting. I've really learned so much. My name is James Taylor. I'm a filmmaker. And for the last 4 or 5 years, I've had the pleasure and privilege of working very closely with Slum Dwellers International. Sibulele, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, James.
Hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sibulele Roji. I'm a mobile filmmaker, so I basically make films using my mobile phone. Thank you, James.
Thanks. And yeah, Spoo and I go way back to, I think it was 2016, where Sibulele was on one of our first workshops. And yeah, this guy's got, now that he's working full-time with us. I'm just going to share my screen and talk you through what we are doing and what we have learned through this COVID experience. And I should be sharing. So as you probably know, Slum Dwellers International is a movement of the urban poor for their dignity and development. The foundation principles are really around data. We have a very strong data offering where communities mobilize through data, through savings, which are one of our core rituals, and then very importantly, peer-to-peer learning. People learning from each other. And I think that echoes Emilia's idea of action learning and live learning experiences. And Emilia, I do hope you don't mind if I borrow those phrases. So yeah, through COVID, it's been really, it's been very busy. There's been a lot of activity, you know, obviously around providing water access and tippy taps at the entrances, education and awareness, as well as advocacy and trying to make sure that when this new economy is negotiated, the urban poor are not left out in the cold. Just to tell you a little bit about what we do. So Slum Dwellers International was established in 1994. And essentially, there's an awareness that as our leadership ages, we need to develop second-tier leadership. We also need to put youth at the center, develop youth. And there was also this awareness that we need to bring our media in line with what is happening in this new era. So that's where we came in with our workshops. The heart of what we do is Know Your City TV. And essentially, before COVID, how this would work is we would typically travel to a community and provide training, some kind of workshop and some kind of skills, and then mentor the students as we, when we left, we stay in touch on our WhatsApp platform. The heart of staying in touch has been WhatsApp. We found that our WhatsApp channel, our WhatsApp platform, which now has, I don't know, lots of members, they come and go, but well over 100, I think close to 2 now. And the challenge is to keep a discipline so that we only post things around media and media for change. But really, this is a safe space, and this comes back to Melia's point about creating safe harbor, shared learning experiences, sharing learning in language that you're familiar with. And here, people post their media making ideas, their stories, and we offer some sort of criticism, not only Sibelele and myself, but also the other participants, offer some encouragement, and we learn from each other. It's a nice, safe environment because it's a closed platform. We also have a very active Facebook page. I'm going to ask Sibelele to paste the links as we go through these in the chat. Please find our Facebook page, like, share, and follow us, and also stay in touch, reach out. This is where, this is not a closed platform. Like with our SDI platform, for example, this is a typical NGO kind of Facebook page where we curate and post the material. Whereas the Know Your City page is an open page to participants who've gone through some kind of training and activation. In other words, it gets quite messy and wild, and anything goes really, as long as it's related to media for change. But we also see some amazing work coming out and people learning from each other and posting better and better things. So that's been a real, that's really been strengthened by this forced isolation. So that's in a nutshell what we do. Essentially, with the lockdowns and with the epidemics, we've had to tailor our model and sort of tweak what we were doing anyway. What we found is that, giving online courses like such as this one, which would be a masterclass in documentary filmmaking. If I were to present this to someone who was accessing the course from their mobile phone in a slum with very bad connectivity, and also in a very data poor environment where their data is really, really expensive, it would be very challenging. The signal would drop, and what we have found is that if we create our slides in Google Slides, and then inside the slides create a live link such as this one here. So when you get the PDF, you can click on the live link and it'll take you specifically to that video, and you can watch that piece. It's a good way of saving data. And then when we have our webinars, often people switch off their video and follow along concurrently using the PDF. And we found that worked really well. Essentially, it's not been that easy though. There's also, problems of, we've learned that it's better to have a number of short webinars than very, very long webinars, and that webinars don't always start on time and end on time. But I mean, all in all, I think we've really embraced this learning by doing. If I could just skip through a few more examples. Our partners in Nigeria, the Nigerian Slum Informal Settlement Federation Media Team, as facilitated by Justice Empowerment Initiative, have started this amazing video diary and audio diary using a map app, where you can click on these various links and get audio and video testimonies of events as they happen. So I would encourage you to have a look at those when you get a chance. We also create slides using Spark, which is Adobe's free service, design service. Here we're creating a Spark post talking about what is happening in America, and then how does that relate to what happens in Africa every day? Why is it that when an incident of police brutality happens in America, it blows up and becomes this international incident, but it's almost like commonplace and something that people living in informal settlements know all too well. So these kind of webinars, discussions are very much not a one-way learning. It's very much a discussion, and then we base everything around little tasks to get people to collaborate with not only each other in their own country, but also to make those international connections and reach out and get to know each other a little bit better. Another link I'd like to share with you, this is something that our team in Mukuru in Kenya have come up with, a little music video, really interesting, creative approaches to getting the message across and to really activate people. I know Sibylele has some reflections on both the challenges and the opportunities in working with people remotely and what we've learned. Swoop?
Thank you, James. It has really been an interesting adventure joining Know Your City TV and SDI. I think what I can say, because I think you've touched based on everything. So what I can just say is it has been a great initiative. The guys are trying their best, even though even now we are in South Africa, we are doing this presentation. So we are getting people now who want us to do the presentation in French. So we have to now adapt and change from English to French, even if we don't understand French. So the guys are coming in, they want to assist, which is good now, because this means the youth is now taking this as their own baby, instead of letting all the old people do it for them, because that is how things have been happening. The youth have
I think we've got a bad connection. Sibylele, when you come back, it's dropped off. But just to pick up, yeah, I think the real kernel is to learn by doing, and to not make it a top-down, do this kind of approach, but more of an invitation to participate. Sibylele, are you back?
Yes, I'm back, James. I seem to be having network problems. I don't know what's happening. So as I was saying, it has been a great adventure. Seeing the guys now taking the initiative, wanting to do the presentations themselves. We started these presentations. Now they are coming forward, wanting to present what they do and what they think can help other societies and other communities. So yeah, it has been a great experience. Thanks, James.
And just to conclude, I think we'll keep it short and sweet, although we can probably speak all day. I think what's really been interesting for me personally is to even understand this concept of isolation and being isolated and not having that human interaction has even made the interactions we do have and we are allowed more meaningful and more powerful. And I'm certain that this is a defining moment in our history, and that we will look back at this, and we have a responsibility to make sure that we use what we've learned here and we don't forget this and try and just put it behind us, but to actually try and to build on this, you know, because I mean, I've like these kind of conferences, you know, reaching out to people in other parts of the world, it's made me realize how small and interconnected this planet is. And we certainly need, we've got a lot to sort out. COVID's flavor of the month at the moment, maybe next year it'll be old news. But I think the problems facing the poor people on this planet are not going to go away for a long time. So thank you for having us on the panel, and we look forward to discussing further.
Thank you, James and Sibu. And just to quote James, webinars don't always start on time and they don't always finish on time. And so we just want to point out that, that the YouTube recording of this webinar, of the full webinar, will be available on the DPU's YouTube channel. But to everyone who's still around, and we really appreciate that, let's just continue straight away with Catalina Ortiz, who's an associate professor at the DPU. Catalina? Unmute yourself, please.
Sorry. Yeah, hello everyone. This is what happens when you've been in front of screens for so long that you forget always the basics. So I'm going to try to be very quick and share what we've been doing in a long term and how we've adapted in a way to the conditions that we are in. We've been delving this idea of understanding urban storytelling and how can we come across or think about a colonial turn of urban learning, but now with the additional concerns that the online world brings us. So we, are working with the inspirations of popular education, and I think something crucial for us has been, and is very well connected to most of the cases that we presented today, is trying to recenter the role of the stories as a way, as a bridges to build epistemological justice. And I think that is the key tenet that we try to keep and be truthful to it despite the changes of the conditions. And we've been working on using and devising critical urban pedagogies and thinking and connecting with visual and digital and performative storytelling. This is part of a research project that I started last year, and we are building on that to actually rethink and putting at the center this notion of pedagogies. And we are delving into a particular practice in the Colombian context in the city of Medellin that is called the convite, and we understand this as a practice that is performed in several places where people get together to do the upgrading of their own neighborhoods, that they cook together, and they basically do and connect and do all the affective bonding that is required to transform and build up communities. This is what some of our colleagues in South Africa call resistant text, and we see this as something that is teaching us to actually change the way we envision pedagogy. Something crucial for what we consider this idea of the convite is the idea of togetherness, of cooking, of collective action, and that then remains one of the key challenges that we still have when moving to online. We were working collaboratively and engaged in a learning alliance with different organizations to create a network of urban storytellers, and that in a way became part of the feedback or all the work that was part to create a transmedia platform. And then we end up devising also a pedagogical toolkit where the cooking, the walking, and the connection, the trusting bonds that were created, using our hands to co-create was something critical. And now we depart in a way from a different strategy. While we wanted to do and recreate these immersive digital spheres and try to mobilize stories in different realms, now in this new learning and alliance that now we are conducting for our, what we call our practice module at the DPU, We remain and we kept this idea of the Learning Alliance, but this time to co-create particularly with partners from community groups, local government, and volunteers from architecture schools. So we have a sense of having a renewed bonding trust among these our partners, but also putting up front this idea of the sensorial deprivation, that we pretty much have to deal with that, and all the emotional burden that it brings, that in a way goes beyond what we were used to do. And of course, the digital inequalities, bringing together community leaders with the conditions that were described before is not an easy task. And there's a lot of material work being done behind and in the backstage to make this happen. This is part of the work that has been done by my students. So most of the images that I'm going to use come precisely from that co-creation process that has been taking place for over a month in a very intensive fashion. And this is how they perceive. How can we actually connect and co-create when this is all what you get? So there's a lot of things that are missing, lost in translation, both literally and metaphorically speaking. Then we are creating this notion of the diaspora of the communities of practice and trying to introduce principles of intergenerational learning. And in the teams that we assemble and created, then we try to have this balance of having people from different generations, and also particularly to deal with all the technological new challenges that we had to face. Some of our partners said, we are all equal here. This community leader thought that in this new format, it was also an option or a venue where all we see at least each other as equal. And I think that was a very interesting and poignant description, the one that he had. But also we have this challenge of thinking of how these pedagogies foster new infrastructures of care. Now we are devoting more time to checking up how everyone is doing and feeling, and that needs to be considered as a central element of any engagement, because these are very challenging times in terms of mental health, but also in the livelihoods threats that our partners are facing. So this part becomes very, very important. And again, this affection part is very key to all what we do. This is some note that one of the community leaders left us. We hope to give you soon a hug with the body, with the soul, and with the heart. And I think that remains, and I refuse to think that we are going to end up just living in these screens. And that we hope is just a temporary moment. And that's why we are creating, somehow experiencing new affective cartographies. Students and colleagues and partners were trying to think differently. How can even touch each other even if we are not touching in reality? And I think this is also capturing how you, after working and co-creating together, despite the conditions, you'd really develop some affection and connection. We kept working on the idea of stories of individual, collectives, and places. And what our partners said, that we are having a conversation with the territory, even though you are not here in person and walking around it. So we really thought that as one of the epicenters of the material for creating our design strategies. So we are a master in urban design, and therefore it's not only about documenting what is there, but also thinking how that can be useful to transform and what is the city we want to see in the future. And therefore, we keep working on this notion of territorial memory as a very important tool to imagine the future we want. And therefore, this co-creation process ended up being a lot about creating an archive of the commons and being a collective curatorial practice at the end of the day. We focus a lot on trying to make inventories, or focus on popular practices and knowledges, and try to see how it plays out in the territory, but also in the practices and in the discursive practices that now we had more time actually to listen and devote all our attention to. Also, we've been doing more work of what I call distributed public engagement. Before I wouldn't be thinking that much in this, but now we've been having a parallel, very intensive work with community media that is playing an absolutely crucial role in this moment. Already before, but now more than ever, people are relying on community media. So therefore, we've been engaging with these the radio stations are becoming very important. So we have been trying to also engage with urban journalism and collaborative platforms such as the wiki that our partner has developed, also to have different ways to disseminate and put in the public agenda the discussions that we're having in. And finally, we also work in terms of aiming and having political incidence. The work we're doing, particularly in Medellin with this community that is called Moravia, is creating an atlas that we hope it will be a tool to counteract all the threats of eviction that the community that we're working with is facing. And therefore, part of what we are doing as part of our design strategy is thinking precisely how is going to be the political campaign and the use of the communication strategy as part of the discussion that is having in the city precisely now, where the local plan is being decided and the public budget is being assigned. So for doing that, we've been inviting to our presentations and the different iterations of what we're going to do in the launch that is going to happen this Friday, is bringing city councillors, civil servants, UN Habitat delegates, platforms to write to the city, and NGOs that work in advocacy to actually be engaged with the work we're doing. And therefore, this is something that we, in a way, is an integral part of our pedagogy. And just to conclude, I think there's already so many questions and so much more things to consider, but I think we need to think also to be truly emancipatory in these processes. How can we also emancipate for the corporate domination that most of the technologies we use have? And what could be then the living heritage that we are all creating? When are we going to learn with each other also to create this idea of the commons of urban learning? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caterina, for this beautifully narrated and also designed presentation. I think a lot of the questions that I saw in the question and answer session and that you've been posted have already now been addressed by Catalina. On the one hand, this very the role of affection and emotion in learning processes at the moment, and also the mentioning of alternatives for people who don't have access to online digital learning. So for example, the radios that you mentioned, and also what Silvia spoke about in the presentation before. So because we are heavily over time, I would like to give the floor now to Diana Laurelat, who is professor at the UCL Institute of Education and the chair of Learning with Digital Technologies. Yeah, give her the probably difficult task of reflecting on those 5 presentations and some of the questions that have been arising also in terms of, how can we adapt the tools, shape them, scale them up, because she's been working on that for many years now. Diana, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Julia. It is a very challenging task, I have to say, because they were such rich presentations. It's been absolutely fascinating to listen to these. So I've tried to find a kind of thread running through them. And I think the thing that we have to be very aware of is that we're talking about professional learning here, and the building of community knowledge through and among professionals and the people that the professionals work with. So we're not talking about undergraduate education and other kinds of education, which is important because precisely as so many of you have said, you're talking about an equality of knowledge exchange here. There aren't any hierarchies, and it is what we're trying to do as we use these technologies is to find ways in which we can equalize those apparent hierarchies in the way that knowledge is normally communicated and built. And so all of those phrases like that, and action learning, and the invitation to participate, I think that was James's phrase. So all of those kinds of things are ways in which we're trying to make sure that we use the technology in ways which enable us to build together and learn from each other, whoever we are. But the question that I was trying to answer for myself all the way through is the sense in which you're able to both orchestrate and curate that knowledge generating process. Now, I think you talked quite a lot about the orchestration, because there were several examples in which you talk about how you invite people to come in and share their ideas. You have things like webinars, you have use of media, and all of those are ways in which you can get people to represent their knowledge and share them. So those, all of those creative media representations are really excellent ways of collecting those stories. But then you're really trying to do something with all that as well. And so that means that the curation process is very important. And I particularly liked what Catalina had to say about that, because there were so many examples there in what you said, Catalina, of how you do the curation. The work that we're doing within the Relief Center, which is part of the Institute for Global Prosperity, so we're working with your colleagues there, we're working in the MENA region, focusing especially on Lebanon. And we've tried to organize our work around a theory of change which has 5 parts to it. It's really about the kind of co-design process way in which we do research. And the 5 parts are to engage right from the beginning with people there. The research should be addressing their particular ideas and needs, and then develop. And what we develop is then a co-constructed MOOC. Now, a MOOC is a massive open online course, as I'm sure you're aware, but it really does, it can really be massive. It gets to hundreds of countries. And so that is an opportunity to take each of these localized learnings and find ways in which we can say, but this is a pattern which you too could use. But of course, when you localize it, so after the engage and develop process, then you're extending to those wider communities, many other communities. But then part of that process where you're orchestrating pedagogies in the course is to help people localize and embed what they're doing in their own practices. And then to record that and share those with other people, and to feed back on how actually that particular kind of practice doesn't work, or there are particular local conditions or cultural phenomena which make it difficult. And so the whole community learns that way. And then ultimately, through all of those processes, you've achieved some kind of ownership through the people that you're working with, which enables the whole thing to sustain itself, so that it does become an ongoing community knowledge building process. Now, the reason that I mentioned the MOOCs and the way in which you can use those to get into impacting on policy and local programs and so on is precisely because you can invite all those people in. And I think several of you were talking about the different kinds of professionals that you work with. It might be local government, it might be NGOs, it might be local community leaders. But that's, I mean, the beauty of the online content is precisely that it changes those kinds of relationships, is that you can bring more people into that discussion. And if you organize the discussions well, then it becomes a genuine transaction and an exchange. And that brings me to the point about the important difference between synchronicity and asynchronicity. So this is a synchronous learning experience. And I have to admit, I've learned an enormous amount. So, I mean, just sitting and listening is fantastic. And no one should ever undermine how important that is. You know, we do need to learn from each other. But it is synchronous. And that means that only a very small number of us, maybe 8, sometimes 10, get to speak. And as I think it was Amelia said, that webinar experience is rather like being in this, you know, huge conference and you never get your moment to speak. But asynchronous contexts are really quite different. And part of the work we've done is to show that if you have a group of students that you're working with, let's say, the ratio of teacher talk to student talk in a normal tutorial with, say, 10 students will be about 9 to 1. And then when you go and look at that same group in the follow-up online discussion group, which is asynchronous, it's the exact opposite. That ratio reverses. It's 9 student talk to 1 teacher talk. So that's an opportunity for really enabling people to bring out those different ways of representing their stories, representing their knowledge, getting them to critique what the kinds of things that is being said in whatever the video is. And so, although there are those kinds of asymmetries that I think it was Adriana was talking about to begin with, asymmetries can work both ways. So there are asymmetries in face-to-face situations where people are too shy to talk, or they feel that they have no place to talk, or they feel uncertain about talking for whatever reason. And those same people can become voluble in the context of an online discussion. So it's all down to the way in which we ourselves design and facilitate those active learning processes and the way that we engage people with us. So whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, whether it's using media to talk or using media where the participants are actually using the creative media themselves to tell their own stories or to share their experience. And then ultimately the question comes back to then how do you curate it all? Because knowledge has to be curated. You can't use it if it's so ephemeral as scrolling through masses and masses of things on Facebook or WhatsApp or something like that. It's lost. You can't find it again. It's too difficult to find. So we do need those kinds of technologies, and a MOOC is one of those kinds of technologies, where you have the opportunity to bring things together and curate them. So you have these and you can select them, and you can have them in a place where people can keep coming back to them. Or you could have your own Wikimedia page or something like that, where you collect everything which your community has done and wants to pass on to the world. But the curation of this community knowledge is as important as the elicitation and sharing of it in those ephemeral situations. So now, there were so many things. And the final thing I just want to end up saying is that this is an incredibly difficult switch for people to make. Because so many people are unused to doing things. I think the community here is very different because you're obviously very practiced in doing a lot of online work with the people that you work with. But just in case anybody's interested, there will be on next Monday starting an ARENA course at UCL. ARENA is the central teacher education support, academic education support within UCL to help people understand about teaching and learning and including now going online. So that's going to begin on Monday. I think it lasts for about 3 weeks, be open to everybody. So please go and have a look at that if you want some more ideas on the tools that you can use, on the pedagogies that you can use to really make this active learning that you're talking about and knowledge sharing and knowledge building as good as it possibly can be with the very limited technologies we have. So thank you very much for this opportunity, Adriana. I really welcomed the opportunity to listen and learn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diana, James, Sibu, Catalina, all of you. It has been amazing. We are well over, completely like any discipline, which I'm glad about. And we also have some undisciplined people in the audience, still 60 people. So thank you so much to you all, and apologies for going over. I wouldn't try to be as full as offering any closing remarks, because I think that the beauty, is that we all go to sleep with all these amazing ideas, arguments, provocations in our head without anybody trying to encapsulate them. What I do want to do is two things. Well, one is to say a very big thanks to Erika Smith that assisted us with the translation, and also to Alexander McFarlane, David Heyman, Irene Fuertes, and Narciso Cuevas, all of whom worked very hard behind the scenes to make this possible and quite smooth. We are going to share the recording of this session, the full recording, very soon, both in Spanish and in English. So you can find there, and we will anyway make it available very soon on all the websites of the co-organizers. And if you want to contribute or, I don't know, continue that discussion in another virtual space, social media and so on, there are the details of how to keep on connecting with organizations involved today. Beyond all that, beyond sharing, beyond thanking enormously. I mean, I have learned a lot. So really, I mean, a huge thanks for today. Huge thanks for both to everyone in the audience for the many questions. I mean, the questions have been fantastic. The observations, the comments have been fantastic. I think that what we need to do is probably to create perhaps an asynchronous moment to continue this conversation. So we're going to work on that and see how to continue this, because it is far too much just to park it here. And I think that, I mean, as many of you said, the finding this moment so meaningful also gives us the responsibility of doing something about these exchanges, that lives, that becomes less ephemeral, that lives, that is curated into something else. So basically, this is just watch this space. We are definitely going to follow on this conversation. And thank you very, very much to all.